The definition for seasonal affective disorder is known as Major Depressive Disorder with seasonal pattern in the DSM-5, which I'm going to have you tell us a little bit more about in a minute, because I don't know what that is, and I'm guessing most of our audience doesn't. Onset of depressive symptoms is directly correlated with a particular time of year, and full remission occurs at a certain separate time of year. No non-seasonal major depressive symptoms occur outside of that time. That's so fascinating to me. And before we go into these symptoms, explain to me the DSM-5, what that means.
So the DSM-5 is kind of the gold standard diagnostic manual for mental health professionals. So psychiatrists, psychologists, even our PCPs, and then as a licensed professional counselor or licensed social workers, we also are educated and licensed to diagnose from this manual. And so I have one that sits on my desk. It outlines the criteria for mental health disorders. And so this description, these kind of fancy names that we might hear, all come from that manual. That's kind of what all our providers use.
Got it. Okay, great. Thanks for that context. And I figured it was something like that. We're going to have her explain that just to make sure we understand what it is we're hearing here. All right. So some symptoms that you might be having: feeling sad or having a depressed mood, loss of interest or pleasure in activities once enjoyed, changes in appetite, usually eating more. I definitely eat more in the wintertime. I'll tell you that right now. Craving carbohydrates. Change in sleep, usually sleepy too much, having a hard time getting out of bed, loss of energy or increased fatigue despite increased sleep hours. You just feel tired all the time or just lack energy. And I've heard that a lot from people that I know that deal with this. Increase in purposeless physical activity, inability to sit still, pacing, hand-wringing, or slowed movements or speech. These actions must be severe enough to be observable to others. Feeling worthless or guilty, difficulty thinking, concentrating, or making decisions, and thoughts of death or suicide. So there's a lot of different symptoms here. And I think you can have maybe your variation of where you come in on this spectrum probably depends on how many of these symptoms you have.
Absolutely. So for a clinical diagnosis of seasonal affective disorder, you must have 5 or more of the symptoms you just listed for a diagnosis. And so again, this is the more severe version, right? We might be hearing some of these symptoms you're reading out and say, oh, I feel that and I feel that. And this lasts for me throughout the winter. You do not have to have all of these to benefit from the tips and science-backed interventions we'll talk about that can help us feel better during certain seasons that we experience these shifts in mood.
Okay. I love this. And and we're talking about this before the holidays too, because the holidays, especially Christmas and New Year's and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and all these different holidays that we experience this time of year, that can bring on a whole other set. So let's at least give, for those people out there that deal with these seasonal depression things, let's give you some tools for that. So you've at least got something to go in before you go home to the in-laws or parents or grandparents or cranky uncle or whatever it is you're facing in the next couple of weeks. So we can be affected by seasonal changes and shifts. We can all be affected.
Absolutely.
However, if you feel you might have sad, like you're feeling more of these things I mentioned, 5 or more of these things, contact a mental health care professional, such as a social worker, a counselor, psychiatric NP, psychologist or psychiatrist, to be evaluated. It's really important not to underestimate. I think it's one of those things that people don't pay enough attention to, and they don't know they're in trouble until they're really in trouble. And so we want to encourage you. And in our sources today, we are going to have sources that you can actually reach out to. BLND is a company that they can meet with you virtually from anywhere.
Yes.
So if you're interested in learning more about BLND, about Marissa, about their other great therapists, that's an option that's available to you right from your own home. You know, if you're not liking what you see in your area, don't feel like you're connecting with anyone, or just can't get out. So, you know, you just are not able to get out of your house or have transportation, there's still help for you.
Absolutely.
And we're going to have those resources.
Yeah. And some people prefer.
So that's going to be available to you too.
Therapy from their home, you know, with their dog on their lap, or you might see my cats pass by here at any point and snuggle with me a little bit. It can enhance our sense of safety sometimes when we're able to do therapy from home. And I would take it a step further to, if you know, you're listening to this today and you know this starts to happen for you in upcoming months, start to talk to somebody now, even when you're feeling good. Let's prepare you for this season in which you have these unpleasant symptoms so that maybe they're not as frequent or as severe or last as long. Because truly what we see from the scientific perspective from individuals diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder is there is a decrease in their serotonin levels. And they're almost always, and especially women, are almost always vitamin D deficient. And so that correlates to sunlight for women. This also correlates the amount of calcium we retain in our bones. And so the self-care and treatment of SAD and or mood related seasonal changes will address those dips in serotonin and the vitamin D deficiencies.
That's really good information. And those are things that we can fix pretty easily, like adjust pretty easily. I mean, in terms of vitamin D, I mean, those are very tangible things that we can do something about. And I love the getting ahead of it, you know, getting ahead of it and being ready for it. And then I think that even that can change your mindset going into it when you feel equipped and you have tools that can help you. Some other self-care, some of this we mentioned already, but some self-care and treatment of SAD and mood-related seasonal changes can be circadian rhythm. Transition your sleep-wake cycles to light-dark cycles. Get at least 10 minutes of sunlight or bright light if unavailable within 2 hours of waking up. Have a nighttime routine. Therapy might be really helpful to you during this time, and especially before, to get you ready for it. Physical activity. We lived in Chicago one winter. No, for 3 winters, but one of those 3 winters was, oh my God. It was like 25 below zero for 3 straight weeks. Like you just really couldn't even, the sun was out, did not matter. I mean, like we'd gotten a bunch of snow and then it just dropped off the planet temperature-wise. And I mean, you can relate to that living in the mountains of Colorado. BLND is based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. So definitely seen these, you know, I'm from the north, so we've seen these things, but like that was the most extreme I'd ever seen. I walked my stairs every day. I had an old home that was built in the late 1800s, and we had a lot of stairs from the basement to the main floor to the top floor. I walked the stairs for 30 minutes every day to get that physical movement in. So look at what you have. Do laps around your house. There's ways we can move. And then I also had all the blinds open so I could see the sunshine, even though it was frigid and it was deceiving. I had the blinds open. I could see the natural light was pouring into my home and I was walking. So that's just something that I found that literally got me through that winter. It kept me moving. I wasn't just sedentary all the time, wrapped in my blankets. It helped me build up I put it on enough layers and, you know, built up a sweat. And that, I mean, that's just an example of something you can do just in your own home, especially in those extreme situations. We talked about this a little earlier, vitamin mineral deficiency, hormone and cortisol levels, PCP, functional integrative medicine provider, holistic psychiatrist. Those are things I've worked on where I've been really able to integrate some supplements that are really helpful. As I've gone through menopause and things have gone up and down, I found when we were in Chicago, I started the menopause cycle and all these things kind of hit at one time. And that was really helpful for me. It really was. It really was. It was body chaos. It honestly was. Yeah, talk to those people that aren't just going to throw a prescription at you, but that really want to talk to you about what's going on in your body and how to respond to it appropriately. What do you love about other seasons? What about that can you incorporate into your routine life environment? I know that, I have family members that have lights that you can get those mood lights and those seasonal warm lights that are specifically, and you can sit in front of those and it can feel like a warm day on the beach, and you can kind of, meditate and put yourself there kind of mindfully with your eyes closed. I mean, I think those are really important. And what about, it's also social engagement support system, because especially, when it's cold and dreary outside, it's kind of hard to get excited to go outside, but we tend to want to shut ourselves in, but that's exactly the opposite of what we need. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm a big believer in kind of my foundational theories that inform my practice as a therapist, that isolation exacerbates our underlying issues. And many people with various types of depression self-isolate because they lack that motivation to connect with their social supports. They lack, especially with the seasonal pattern type of depression we're talking about today. Like you said, it's not particularly inviting if it's cloudy for 7 days and it's frigid cold, or maybe this is more unusual, but your seasonal affective disorder happens to come through in the summertime for you. Perhaps that comes from a trauma you experienced in the summer, or just a dislike for that type of climate in general. And so there are a variety of contributing factors to why this shows up in certain seasons of life. But it's incredibly important to stay connected to the people who support us. I can't emphasize that enough.
I'm glad you mentioned the summer piece, because Jessica talked about that in her blog a little bit. Like, that can happen too. And it's not as common. It's not the one we hear about, but that's also something. So if you're feeling these symptoms going into summer, I know that that's a possibility as well, and incorporate some of these same things. You just may love the warm, cozy winter. That may be something for you that felt very safe growing up or inviting. I know for me, the holidays were a safe emotional time in my home. The rest of the year wasn't so safe. So I loved that time of year. So think about if you've got those kinds of things going on too, and know that the summer heat might do the same thing to you as the winter cold might do to somebody that experiences this during the wintertime. So don't ignore these things if you're feeling this in a season other than going into the winter. I'm glad you brought that up. All right, so we're going to bring in our talking points here and how they can apply to helping us deal with this seasonal depression issue, however it shows up and whatever level it shows up in you. So we're going to start out with how to prioritize self-care in your life and what that looks like. So talk to me about a good self-care practice.
A quote I heard quite some time ago that really resonated with me about self-care was, a self-care practice is creating a life you don't need to escape from.
Wow. That's so powerful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it resonated with me in the same way I think it kind of hit you, Melissa, where, we always talk about, let's go on vacation, let's get away, let's escape. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all need to do that. But some people don't always have the privilege of that for whatever reason, right?
Sure.
We just went through a pandemic. Vacations weren't really an option. During the pandemic.
No, there was no escaping
physically. No escaping physically. Yeah. And so what we need to do with our self-care is incorporate moments and things throughout the day that offer that same sense of escape and or groundedness for you. That looks absolutely different for everyone. Okay. And so it's getting in touch with ourselves and what we need on a day-to-day basis. How can I cultivate time? Because I work with a lot of women, and guess what? Women are busy. We're juggling a lot of different roles. And so many times we put ourselves last, and we must cultivate space to prioritize ourselves as much as the things we're committed to, as much as our loved ones, because we will burn out. And especially at this time of year where we see the seasonal affective disorder come into play even more, women are planning holidays. Women are cooking. Women are opening up their home. And so how can we implement something that is just for us every day, so we are not craving or seeking escape in a way that doesn't serve us well?
Right. And I think that's where those not getting out of bed, craving the carbs, not wanting to engage socially or leave comes into play. And this is how you can combat those things. And I think for me, I noticed this showing up in January. I'm on fire through January 1st. But January is really hard coming off the holidays. And then if you factor in someone who's dealing with a seasonal on top of that, so these things are important anyway. They're even more important if you're dealing with this, and you cannot put yourself on the back burner on this. It's not, and if you're having trouble, if you struggle with that whole this is selfish thing, which we talk about a lot on this podcast, and I'm really trying to dispel that myth. It's not selfish. It's not only good for you, it's good for the people around you. Because think about it, how much better it's going to be for everyone you engage with if you're functioning at a healthier level, taking care of yourself versus not, and being depressed, sad, not wanting to engage, not wanting to get out of bed, all those types of things. It just improves that for everybody. Everybody's experience is better with you. It
does.
And with yourself.
Well, and this is a very cliche term. We can't pour from an empty cup, but it's incredibly true. I'm not my best self if I'm not taking the time to give myself what I need routinely. That affects the people we care about in our lives.
Absolutely.
Whether we want to acknowledge that or not.
Yeah, absolutely true. So true. And I think if we can think about it that way, it helps us to frame it better for us too, especially those that struggle with the whole selfish piece. Like, well, wait a minute. Actually, when you look at it from this standpoint, they're not getting the best of me if I don't do this. And I'm not giving the best of myself, which then, so it's all works together that way. Confidently setting boundaries within this. So talk to me about the boundaries piece, and especially how it plays into dealing with this disorder or this problem that you might be dealing with the seasonal affective.
Boundaries are something my clients probably get tired of me talking about. I am a huge proponent of boundaries. I operate from a relational perspective. So boundaries, first of all, are what allow ourselves the space to love us as a human being and be able to love others. And so in order to confidently set boundaries, I believe we must learn to tolerate the emotional distress that may occur sometimes from the individuals we're attempting to set boundaries with. People are going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
They're not going to like it. They might push back. That other person's reaction is not our responsibility, right? We can be considerate and kind in our boundaries, but we cannot control how that person is going to respond to us. And guess what? If we're afraid of that person's reaction, that's an indicator we need to set boundaries with that individual even more, or individuals.
Absolutely. Yeah, which isn't the irony of that is so interesting.
Well, and again, women, I think this is a societal and cultural thing that's been going on for decades, if not centuries, is that we're the caretakers. We take care of everybody else, including their emotions, including their issues. And that takes us back to what we were just talking about. When we do that, there's once again no more space for our needs, wants, and desires, or what's best for us. So it's not choosing myself over someone else. It's choosing me so I can have a better relationship with that person, even if they don't change.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it's okay to tell people during this season, I deal with these emotions, these stressors. I deal with a seasonal depressive disorder. I can't show up for you in this season the same way I can other times of the year. So I need, and communicating those expectations, because some of the stressors may be like, well, you just did that for me 3 months ago. It wasn't a big deal. Not the same thing. I'm not in my season that is hard for me at that time. So I have to, adjust the expectations of myself and what's best for me in this season. So just knowing this season, my boundaries are going to look different, and they have to, and I think communicating that as well, and so people understand that, there's, and that can be true of any season with anything you deal with, but especially I think for this, communicating that I'm going to show up differently in these 3 months. And I'm going to have to set some different parameters for myself. And so people understand that as well. Being clear in your communication is kind. Clear is kind, even if it doesn't feel like it on the other end. It's just going to be so much better for you. How we can support ourselves and others in living unapologetically in doing this, in like showing up this way. I think it starts with just the conversation we're having today, not being afraid to talk about it and normalizing the conversation. But talk to me about that piece of it.
So I believe that women living unapologetically is a very delicate balance of our fierceness and our compassion. Right.
Yeah.
I think, those are two very polarizing things, but really when we integrate what we're passionate about and we integrate that with compassion and empathy, then we can set these boundaries in a way that are rooted in our values, that are rooted in who we are versus temporary emotions that might come up that are uncomfortable, or negative thought patterns that come up that try to lead the way. So if we can get rooted in the why, I think, and be steadfast in it and keep it at the forefront, I think that's how we are able to live unapologetically. And when it comes to seasonal changes that we experience, once again, that's the commitment to ourselves to take care of ourselves so we can show up in ways for others that is not overextending us.
Well, and I think sometimes we feel like as women, we have to apologize when we're dealing with, when we're sick. I mean, when we have something going on that it keeps us from being what we consider our normal selves or our best feeling selves. Our first, I'm so sorry, I'm inconveniencing you. I'm like, no, we don't need to apologize for that. This is a real disorder. This is a real thing that we deal with. And we just, again, talking about these things, adjusting our expectations for the season, adjusting our boundaries. This goes nicely into, you talked about our why and our values, which is what we're going to talk about next. I think understanding that your values during this season might be different than they are the rest of the year. And also communicating that. Your core values are always going to be there, but you may have some shifts in your values for this season that have to be addressed and adjusted and communicated as well.
Well, certainly. I think, if we're talking about a core value set of 5 to 7 values that we use in this acceptance and commitment therapy model, what we're really looking at is certain ones coming to the forefront more. And yes, there are other values. People can value other things outside of our core values. But in this circumstance, I might be bringing that different value in to solve a problem or address an issue, which and what we're talking about would be our mood shifts during this season. And so I might need to prioritize that a little bit more in my life. And I encourage women we don't have to justify our boundaries or these changes we're making. We don't even have to explain them. If I'm sitting with someone I have a really close, healthy relationship with, and I confide in them and express some vulnerability around why I'm setting that boundary, that's perfectly appropriate because I have a sense of safety with them. But if I'm communicating a boundary to someone who's going to potentially have a disproportionate reaction, an explanation or justification is just information for them to use to attempt to pick apart the boundary.
I love that because I'm the over-explaining champion of the world. You can ask my family.
I sensed that. That's why I said that.
No, I am. No, you sensed absolutely correctly. I am totally that person. And it's something I've really had to focus on. And my therapist is like, you have to quit feeling like you owe these explanations to everybody about every single thing you do. And it comes from an upbringing of not being heard or not being believed or having my voice undermined or, having to just yell to be heard and constantly kind of getting invalidated in that if it didn't line up with what they wanted from me.
Right.
And I don't think I think there's a lot of people that experience that, but I'm so glad you brought that up because I think, again, it goes back to that thing of like, oh man, this season, this time, I have these things I'm dealing with. And you feel like you have to over explain or justify why you're making changes and you don't. And identifying those people that are safe, that aren't going to manipulate or take advantage or use those things against you because they're just unwilling to understand it. They're unwilling to do their own work themselves, whatever it is. So thank you for addressing that. And yes, that and calling that out in me because, oh boy, that is, oh my gosh. It is a work in progress. And when when you're 53 years old and people have been telling me this my whole life, and especially my daughters as they became adults, but my husband for, over 30 years now. And finally in my early 50s, I'm like, yeah, that is a thing. It's a big pattern. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think, so addressing that and accepting that. Living out of our own expectations versus others. I think that's important anyway. And then in this season, even more important. And again, it just goes back to adjusting expectations to what you can do versus what others might expect of you.
There is another quote I use a lot, and it is, unspoken expectations are, and this may be consciously or subconsciously, but premeditated resentments. And so it's important to consider where our own expectations of ourselves come from first and foremost, because many times we internalize narratives from childhood, from our culture, from our society that aren't really ours to begin with. And I think that is kind of a journey throughout life that starts happening in pre-adolescence, adolescence, as our brains fully develop in our mid-20s, and then through our lived life experiences as we approach middle adulthood and so on. So this is an ongoing journey. First of all, there's not going to be one day where you're like, all these expectations are not mine to hold. And so it's a growth process. But asking yourself, are my expectations reasonable, compassionate, achievable, based on my values? Once again, do I know my values? Do I know who I am? Am I operating from a place of my value set when it comes to expectations of myself versus others, and not a feeling of frustration or a feeling of I have to succeed or I have to be there for everyone else? And this is where I think guilt comes up for many women when we think about operating from our own expectations versus others, that we might let people down. I think inherently as humans, we want to be liked. We want to connect. We want to please people to a certain extent. But once again, we need to be rooted in our expectations, not in the reactions of others to our expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. And that one's can be a hard one because I will tell you from my own experience that different people in your life have different levels of acceptance or understanding of anything to do with mental health. And they will have and you got to know who those people are and who you're dealing with and just understand that narrative, that is their narrative. That is theirs. That is not yours to manipulate or control or even try to change. And so understanding that as well, that no matter what you say, do, whatever, it is only your responsibility to communicate what to yourself and to others, what your expectations of yourself, your boundaries, your values, all those things, they're going to do with it what they're going to do with it. You can't make them believe that this thing is real if they just refuse to, if they're just looking for a way out of it. So knowing that too and accepting that as well, which can be hard. But if you can kind of identify who those people are and just be like, what you do or don't do with this is not my problem.
Right.
But this is where I'm at and this is where I have to be for my own health, regardless of your, you decide your acceptance or not of the whole thing. And I think that's important to remember too. This, I think, what can be a tricky one for us, especially when we're dealing with things that are uncomfortable or that we feel that are hard to go through. And it's accepting that those layered aspects of ourselves. I mean, I think there's a lot of us that deal with any kind of thing that's hard. But, we think of like, oh my gosh, this seasonal disorder. I wish it would just go away. I don't like the way I show up in this season. I don't like the way I feel in this season, but that's part of who we are. And in order to really embrace and love ourselves, it's accepting those layers and maybe searching what comes out for me in this season that can be a good thing. What is it giving me a chance to rest more? Is it giving me a chance to focus on myself? Do I have different creativity or in this season? But I think that can be really hard. So talk to me about the layers piece.
So again, this is another one that's a lifelong journey. I think something that's important for us to remember about acceptance is it doesn't mean we have to tolerate certain things. So as you're kind of mentioning there with the seasonal mood shifts, I don't want to deal with this. I can't believe this is happening. Kind of that inner critic that comes up. That's a key component that we also see in a lot of depressive disorders is that cycle of self-critique that comes into play that keeps us in that depressed state and keeps us feeling hopeless. So we can accept and acknowledge that if we're dealing with seasonal affective disorder or disruptive mood shifts, that this is an experience we're having in life. Acceptance also means doing the work required to heal and grow from it and balancing that with allowing ourselves to rest. Because if we're, I'm going to go to therapy every week, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and this is going to look so different for me. We tend to go in that direction or I can't handle this.
Sure.
It's completely out of my control. And it's balancing that idea of growth and work and evolving and allowing ourselves to rest. There's a strong, and it's not a bad thing, movement in our culture. It's important to talk about it as we're doing today that emphasizes healing. However, if we hyper focus on I have to heal, I'm on this healing journey, I'm going to reach this existential place someday, whatever that looks like.
And it's all going to be better.
Right. We're not living in the present. We're constantly focused on our perceived deficits,
missing those moments
and being better. It's okay to be who we are as imperfect people. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not feel happy every single day of the season. It's okay to not enjoy the upcoming holidays all the time because of certain dynamics in your family or commitments you made them like, I wish I had done this instead. It's okay. That steps into that toxic positivity, where everything's
Yeah,
going to look so much different this year. Well, it might, but there might be times where it doesn't. And acceptance
sure.
is saying, that's okay that I'm feeling down today.
Yeah. And I think too, listening to your body, because I know that I've done
Yes.
this. When you get tools for something, you're all of a sudden like, all right, all the tools, here we go. And instead of intuitively listening to what your body needs, the tools can become a checklist. And then you get at the end of the checklist and you're like, why don't I feel any better? And so I think it's so much about maybe a whole checklist was probably too much. You probably don't need all of those things. And two, what do you need today? And it might not be the same thing you need tomorrow. A brisk walk up and down your stairs might be just what your body's telling you to need today. But maybe some light yoga stretching in the sunlight of your living room with the blinds open is what you need tomorrow. I mean, whatever it is,
Right.
but not feeling like those tips. Oh, I got these tips now. I have conquered this disorder. This is not going to be a thing for me anymore. I'm not going to feel this way. And that's not realistic
We're
either.
human.
And
we're human. I know something for
exactly
me, if I have a day where I'm feeling agitated, right? Me going and doing yoga is not the best choice for moving my body at that point. I need to go run. I need to lift weights. I need to expel that energy. But then there are days when my body is like,
right.
I really need to do yoga today. And so it's being aware of what your mind and body needs. It's acknowledging that. And if you can't do an hour of yoga, that's okay. Can you step outside and absorb the sunlight and go on a short walk?
Sure.
How can you do something differently that is more in touch with your need rather than I have to do this because I committed to do this for the month of December?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. And giving yourself grace and knowing just some days are just hard and some days you're going to sit in your blanket and that's okay too. And I think, but also I think from the relationship standpoint, keeping that open communication, maybe you have a scheduled phone call or a scheduled coffee date or something that's on your calendar that it might be take a lot. And that person maybe shows up to your house to get you so that you're not, think of those things that are going to, because it's one of those things I think that whenever you get out and do it, you always feel better after the fact. Like you might be kind of going through the drudgery of getting ready, but then you come back and you're like, at least in my experience, I'm like, I'm so glad I did that. I feel so much better. That was such a good thing. And I know it was hard, but wow. And so if you know that that's hard for you, putting those things in place, where that person is calling you or that person is showing up on your doorstep and pulling you out of the door, whether it's in your, your cute outfit and your hair done or your sweats and your beanie, whatever it looks like. So, that intentionality around that too, knowing yourself and knowing what it is that's going to kind of help keep you, balanced and feeling like you're doing the best you can in a tough season.
And if we're more in touch with what we actually need and how we want to show up in the world, we can make better decisions for ourselves. So maybe it's like, I'm noticing a feeling of unmotivation, right? That's a temporary feeling that's coming up. I know that me getting outside, that me engaging in physical activity, that following through on that coffee date with my friend is what I inherently need versus my temporary feeling of discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That listening to your body is going to tell you. But I think that we, especially as women, we're so busy on the go, so busy taking care of everybody else and doing all the things that we don't, give ourselves the time to just be present and like, what do I need today? What do I need right now today? And it doesn't have to be the whole checklist, or maybe you discover something new that's helpful too, being open to those things as well. In living out F.E.E.L, finding empowerment, embracing layers, especially I think in a season like this, that empowerment piece, we can feel so unempowered sometimes if we feel like we're helpless and don't have tools to deal with something, or we feel like the tools feel hard. I mean, there's going to be days like that. In living out F.E.E.L, how does that affect how you feel about yourself, and then in turn, how you can show up in relationships?
So I think authenticity is one of the most critical aspects to having a healthy relationship. We cannot have a healthy relationship unless we're able to be our genuine selves. And that includes during a season that affects our mood in an unhelpful way. So I think your F.E.E.L acronym truly embodies that concept of authenticity. And this could affect our relationship in many ways. The quality of genuine relationships will flourish, while perhaps revealing which relationships need to shift and change if we can't be our authentic selves. Like, for example, I have an amazing friend, and we talk on a daily basis, and because of our busy schedules, we don't get to meet as often as we would like to. But when we set something up, there's always an understanding if something is happening throughout the week where one of us is like, I need to actually not do this today. We're like, okay, no big deal. I don't get disappointed. She doesn't get disappointed. We're not offended. Her and I can authentically say no to each other.
I love that authenticity piece. I think that's such a good point of how this acronym wraps up in any season or any way you apply it. So I'm so glad you shared that. I hadn't thought of it that way before. And so that's such good information. But yeah, because at the end of the day, if we don't feel safe showing up authentically, no matter what's going on, we're not going to feel safe or like our best selves.
Absolutely.
And so identifying those people too that you can be authentic with. And maybe there's people in this season that you don't have as much contact with because you cannot be your authentic self with them. And so giving yourself a break there too, I think is important. We are down to the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
Yes. So I'm a water baby. I grew up originally at the beach on the East Coast, and then I swam competitively my whole life, including in college. And so water is my element. Okay. So I love swimming. I love scuba diving. That's one of my partner and my favorite activities to participate in. And then more on an accessible self-care basis, bubble baths are my thing. They help me decompress. It is soothing to my nervous system. And so I love water. As you mentioned, I live out in Colorado. So hiking, having a morning routine is incredibly important to nourishing me. I don't like to feel rushed. So I wake up early. So I have plenty of time. And it's not like my morning routine is anything spectacular, but I have time to brush my teeth, make my French press coffee, feed my cats, get settled in my office. And that nourishes me and helps me be in a calm state before I start my day. And then snowboarding and rest nourishes me. So I think you can see like mine's kind of very balanced between activity and also rest.
Yeah. And I think you have to have that for the kind of work you do. I mean, you've just given some great information, but you're helping people with all of these things all the time. And for you to be your best self and showing up, these things are so important. And something that got my attention for those of you that are swimmers and love swimming and being active. And in the wintertime, my middle daughter is a lake swimmer. She loves swimming in the lake. That kid, oh my gosh, she just loves lake swimming, and she can swim forever. Like it's crazy. It's just kind of her natural thing. And so we've talked about in the wintertime, and I think it's for anybody, find that gym or that indoor pool somewhere where it's warm and you can still go in and swim. And maybe you're visualizing that you're at that lake, but that might be something you can still incorporate. That's a summer activity that you can somehow incorporate in your winter, that maybe that's helpful. And I think the morning routine piece, so just that routine is so important to get yourself going. I'm a slow morning person, but if I don't get my slow morning rise, like I knew this morning we were recording at 10 my time. I told Brady, I go, I don't care what time, because we were watching some late movies last night. My husband, I'm like, I've got to be up by 8. I've got to be up so that I can journal, so I can have my coffee, so I can get my head ready, for this time and for the day. So I think those kinds of routines can be really important, especially if you're dealing with a seasonal thing. Is that something that rings true for you that you see?
Oh, absolutely. And, we just experienced a time change also. And so I recommend to almost every individual I work with is to shift our morning and nighttime routine to accommodate that. Our circadian rhythms, we're seeing more and more evidence to that impacting vitamin and mineral deficiencies and all kinds of hormones that affect our mental health and our mood state. And so, going to bed a little earlier in the winter, waking up a little earlier, so we're maximizing our daylight hours. And we want to make sure we do that. I recommend in like 15-minute increments. And so that prevents us feeling fatigued, right? Some people will, for example, I'm up at 6 for work this day, but I sleep until 11 on the weekends. Well, we're messing with our circadian rhythm. And so our morning routine is an important part of that. My body clock is so adjusted now that I don't really need an alarm in the morning. My body wakes me up and say, hey, it's time to get going. And I listen to that.
Yeah.
But it's important to think about it from that perspective and not just, again, not that we have to have 20 minutes of meditation and 30 minutes of journaling and a nature walk in the morning. It can be very simple, as I mentioned, that feeling of not being rushed. But how can I set up my day so that I'm starting it from a place of ease? I think is really important.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I love that. Talk about 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
So those 5 words for me are contentment, connection, gratefulness, peace, and joy.
Yeah. And I think those words all work together. They all play off of each other so well. And again, important for you to be able to do the kind of work you do and feel healthy yourself. Those are really important. Marissa, this has been so great. You have given us so much today. I'm so thankful for your time. I'm excited to hear from Jessica to comment on all these things that she has gotten a chance to hear from you today. Don't you worry, people. All of this information is going to be on our resources page. You'll be able to find it on our website, embracinglayers.com. We will be promoting it on our social media throughout the 2-week period that we are featuring this episode. This episode will drop on Tuesday, December 20th. It will be the main episode feature as we wrap up season 3 and available to you forever on our website. But you can find information on our socials, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok. Where are we? We're everywhere. Twitter for now. Who knows what? That's a moving target right now. And then you can also, TBD. And also you can email us if you've got more questions about this or resources. But again, at embracinglayers@gmail.com. But again, all of Marissa's information, I think that you're going to find this really helpful. It's going to be, all this stuff's going to be listed on our resources page. You can learn more about her in the show notes. Feel free to reach out to Blend or anybody that you think that you can trust if you feel like you're really needing some more help with this or anything, just therapy, period. There's just such a great resource, and make yourself a priority and put yourself at the forefront and know that you're deserving of having that. But again, Marissa, thanks so much for joining us. F.E.E.L podcast audience, we look forward to hearing from you. Send us some DMs if you've got more questions or just thoughts, or you want to share your own experiences. Hello, F.E.E.L podcast audience. So I'm back with Jessica now. We've gotten a chance to hear from Marissa from BLND Health and all of her incredible insight, tips, expertise as a therapist working with people who deal with seasonal affective disorder, SAD, seasonal depression. It's referred to in a lot of different ways. What I love about talking to Jessica is she's experienced it. She's walked through it. She's learned what it takes to walk through it, things that work through her for her. So we're going to get to talk to somebody who has hands-on experience, who had the courage last spring to come forward and say, I want to have a discussion about this. I think it's important. I think it's one of those topics that we need to hear about more. And I couldn't agree more. So Jess, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we jump into the talking points, you talk about in the blog, and we're going to share your blog again the week prior to dropping this episode so people can revisit it. You talk about the fact that this was something that you started bumping into in college. Do you think it was happening before then and you just didn't notice it? Or do you think you really fall into that 18 to 30-year-old group of a lot of times women, more so than men, that just it kind of comes up then?
Definitely experienced it before, but I didn't have a word for it.
Sure.
Like, that was when it kind of clicked for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this just makes so much more sense now. Because it was always in the later months. I was like, I hate the winter. And I just couldn't quite place why or say why. And then I was like, and then my therapist in college was like, oh, do you think you have seasonal depression? And I was like, what is that? And it just changed my life. I was like, oh my gosh, that just makes sense now. And that just gave me ways to cope with it. Cause I was like, that's it. I'm depressed. That's what happens. I couldn't quite figure it out. So definitely in college was when I had an answer for it. But I mean, I could see it before.
Okay. I was wanting to get some insight on that because I thought that was interesting. And I think I think the 18 to 30 is interesting too, because it's a lot of times for a lot of people, the first time they've gone away, either to college, to the military, to tech school, to just moving out on their own and getting a job. And so they're thinking and observing these things on their own. I'm like, you're not under your roof or your parents are kind of giving you reasons or giving you definitions, or maybe you don't know how to talk to them about it. Maybe this isn't a mental health discussion in your home, isn't commonplace or comfortable. So I think it's really interesting how it comes up at 18, but I was thinking this has to be showing up in people before then. I don't have the full on diagnosed disorder, but I definitely have some things from growing up in the Pacific Northwest where it is gray 6 to 8 months out of the year with very few things in between, and how that wore on me. And I had to muster up more energy. And we walked through, as you all heard audience earlier with Marissa, the different signs of it. And I didn't identify with, that 5 or more is okay, you probably have the actual SAD going on. But there was 2 that are absolutely those 2. That is me every winter for my whole life, to the point. So I think that's, important to remember too. We told the audience earlier, remind you again, you don't have to have all of them, just some of them for this to affect you. So for you, as you've navigated this, learned about this, talk to me starting with how to prioritize self-care in your life. How does it look different for you in this season? Or is it just more enhanced? Or how do you approach or especially as you're getting ready to go into that, it's fall, you're like, all right, it's coming. How do you make adjustments in there, or do you just talk to me about that?
It's definitely a lot of, we've talked about a lot before on the podcast, of listening to my body. Sometimes I need to have the rest night, and it's, the sun going down at 4:00 just makes me want to go to bed at 4:00 and lay down and I don't want to talk to anybody. But, and sometimes I do need that. And that's okay. I'm not so pushing it away anymore of no, you need to be doing something all the time. It's some nights I'm okay with just, I need to stay in, it's cold and I'm sad and that's all right. And then other times I'm I need to do something. I need to get up, make plans, go do something. And definitely getting out more during the day is important for that, because it's if I'm in the house all day doing nothing. That doesn't make me want to get up and do something later on when it's dark out, and
sure,
keeps me a homebody. But if I get out and maybe run errands during the day, I'm more energized, I guess, and I feel a lot better. So definitely just following what I feel like I need for sure has helped a lot.
How about setting boundaries? Do you have to set different kinds of boundaries in this season? Just what you can tolerate or what's best for you health-wise? We touched on that with Marissa earlier. I'm curious how that's played out for you.
Well, setting boundaries is hard to begin with, but
it is absolutely in any season, no matter what.
Any season, it's so difficult. Communication is important, that in listening to my body and then like communicating what I need, even from others. Like even from my roommate, if I come home like and I'm having like a sad day where I need to be alone or I need to accept that I'm upset and just wallow in it.
Yeah.
I'm going to my room, like nothing, you didn't do anything wrong, but I'm depressed today. I'm not feeling it today. Like, leave me alone.
Yeah.
Or like, hey, I really am feeling depressed and I need to get out. Like, let's plan to do something fun, like with other friends or something like that. So definitely open communication with that and telling like, hey, I have seasonal depression. So like if my moods are up and down, like that happens every year. Like, no one did anything wrong. It's just the season. And, and then I think that opens more dialogue, like with people, and they're like, well, I get that way too. And you're like, well, perfect. So we have an understanding now. And it's a lot easier than to like link up and like decide what's best for the group or both people or whoever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, you mentioned, if you bring it up, you being willing to talk to it gives freedom for other people that may be having that experience too, to talk about it or even dawn on them. Maybe it hasn't clicked with them before. And then all of a sudden they hear you talking about it, and also choose for your own safety, being in those environments where you can communicate freely, where you don't feel like you have to keep it to yourself. I would think has to be really important.
Mm-hmm.
We all know this one, and this probably comes at an even higher level during this season for you, taking care of your emotional health as much as your physical health.
Yeah, that's so difficult, it seems, in the winter to just stay active, like in your body. Because I do not want to go for a walk when it's like 20 degrees out. I want to stay in bed. So I think even little things can help. Like, every couple of days take my dog for a walk, and that's she makes me. She is like, it's walk time. I already know, so that keeps me motivated, so I know that that's a plan. And then just like little things of maybe I'm gonna park the car farther away in the parking lot, so that's my exercise to get to this, and things like that is just like the little things that will keep up with my body and keep it moving, so I'm not like laying around all the time, because then that affects my mental health greatly. I feel like, well, I haven't done anything. I've been laying around all day. And then I get down on myself, and you beat yourself up of I'm not productive and this and that. So the little small things to keep your body going and active, so you're not like just in a cocoon all day of blankets, even though like mentally I would love to do that.
I know. Well, and not allowing yourself to go down to that rabbit hole where you're not giving yourself empathy and grace, knowing that it's a season you're in. And you mentioned something earlier, and I think anybody that grew up in the North fully relates to this. But if you've grown up in the South, she was not exaggerating when she says it gets dark at 4:00. I mean, that's the truth. It really does. And that's just, if you're in the northern states in the lower 48, if you're in Alaska, forget about it. It's a whole other ballgame up there. But so if you grew up in Florida and you're like 4:00, you're like, it's a thing. It's a thing.
That's the roughest time.
It is. And it changes how you navigate your day. And I think even if you don't struggle with this, we all kind of go through it. I know for Brady and I, we go through an adjustment period of feeling tired sooner because it's 6:00, but it feels like 10:00 because it's pitch black outside.
Yeah.
And it's such a contrast from what you experience in the summertime, but even other seasons. So I wanted to just touch on that. People are like, no, that's a thing. And that affects too. I mean, I think that gives understanding to maybe people who haven't had to walk through this, especially if they didn't grow up in states, because all of us have some degree of it. But I know even living in Lubbock, Texas, which is much farther south than anywhere else I've lived before, there's a full hour to hour and 15-minute difference between, even in the darkest times, when we get dark versus my family in the state of Washington when they get dark. And it makes a difference. In terms of
I've lived in Pennsylvania my whole life. Like, so I've like grown up with this, but like, I can imagine like people who move states and then like, what a jolt of a change.
What a shock.
Yeah, just have to like deal with that. They probably think like the world is ending. Like, why is it dark so late or so early?
And I remember too, like I would go to, when I lived in the Northwest or in northern states period, I'd go to work in the morning in the dark and I would come home in the dark. And that was always tricky too. And so so I'm glad you mentioned like park a little farther away. Walk your dog. I mean, those things that can make you go outside. I mentioned earlier in the episode, I had stairs in my house in Chicago where I would walk my stairs just to make my body move. I mean, so yeah, you have to get a little creative with all of that. Mm-hmm. This, I think, is really important, too, because I think we can be really hard on ourselves when we deal with something like this, especially as women. How can we support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically when you're walking through this?
Well, when I said earlier about communication, I think that is so important, especially because if other women or people don't have the term for it, like I didn't, like just openly talking about it and offering support. And even if they're like, I'm still working it out, I didn't even know this was a thing. And now I'm figuring it out. Like, well, I've experienced it. So you can come talk to me. Or if you don't, then that's okay. But, just knowing someone's there is really nice. And then also me sharing with them, like giving them a piece of myself and being vulnerable and open. Yeah. So then it's just creating the dialogue and being able to share and just know that someone's there, even if you don't need it necessarily.
Sure.
It's still there.
Yeah, you just knowing, you may never talk about it, but just knowing gives some comfort that you're not alone. And I think, you being willing to write this blog and talk about this openly is going to, it's going to open the door for other women and other people, period, that experience this. So I appreciate your authenticity and willingness to be a voice for this thing that I think we just don't talk about enough. And that's, I can't thank you again. I know I thank you for that all the time, but I think it's really important. And that we give ourselves the love for that when we have the courage to step forward and be a voice. The importance of setting and coming back to your why and your values in everything you do. And Valerie mentioned something earlier, I think that was really key. She's like, you have your core values, but maybe of those core values, one specific one comes to the forefront in that season. It's not that your values change. There's just an emphasis on a value that's going to come to the forefront more in terms of helping you feel grounded in deciding how you're going to walk through this season each year. Talk to me about your thoughts on that.
I think that's an excellent point that she makes, because like my why and everything is always that I am like putting out good energy, like just trying to be a good person, like being able to go to sleep at night knowing that, I've done what I can do for the day and I'm an open person, a safe person people can talk to, things like that.
Sure.
And, being very moody in the winter seasons, just being open and stating that, listen, like I really struggle during this time. So I apologize if I can't be here for you right now. Like I could be in the past or want to be.
Yeah.
So, I think that definitely comes forward and like helps me set better boundaries because I want to stay in as that person and stay as that why. So It's like just making sure the people around me that I love and care about, that they're safe, but also like taking care of myself because I don't want to bottle it up and like explode on them. And then it's like, you didn't deserve that. I'm so sorry. And then you have to have the talk afterwards. And that's always a hard time. So I think she's definitely right with that. If you prioritize for sure.
Right. And I think too, just helping people to understand how I show up for you in September may not be how I can show up for you in January.
Exactly.
But don't worry, come late March, early April, I'm back.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something important, to remember too, but just even talking about that fact that you may have to show up differently in this season. But again, I think we keep saying it, but the communication piece is just so important in all of this, especially for you, for your relationships, obviously, but just for you in terms of it just gives less places for us to beat up on ourselves, honestly,
absolutely.
because it's such a natural, unfortunately, inclination so many times when we're going through something hard. Living out of your own expectations versus others. I think especially in this season, and I touched on a little bit earlier, the fact that you may have to show up differently. So how do you adjust expectations during this time? And how do you deal with other people's expectations during this time?
It's hard, being like a people pleaser. And, I always want people to be proud of me, like my family and things like that. But then you don't want them to see you struggle. But it's like, I want to be perfect and I want to have no faults and everything be great. And I want you to be so proud of me. But it's like, this is something that I have to deal with and I struggle with. And, I got to be open about that. And, I'm not perfect and, everyone has faults and struggles and things like that. And so I can't hold myself to like an impossible standard because then it's like, that just leads you beating yourself up and like being even more depressed and like falling into that without ever trying to help yourself. So, just being like, this is setting standards that I could actually meet and like, well, this is what I can do and this is what I can handle. And if that's not what you expect of me and I am a different person in December than I am in June, like, sorry about it. But that's how I am and that's who it is. So,
sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry. Like, I can't help it.
Yeah.
And you can take it or leave it, basically.
Yeah. And I think you have to take that approach. And Valerie talked about earlier, not over explaining, like giving the information and then you're going to do with what you're going to do with, but this is what I need to do for me right now. And I wanted to communicate that to you so you understood where I'm coming from. And then that's where it's at. Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves, because we've talked a lot about in different conversations we've had on the pod together on other episodes you've been on. This can be hard anyway. And then knowing that you have this particular layer within you, accepting that, maybe even embracing that. Talk to me about that journey for you with this.
Yeah, well, I didn't even know that this was like a true layer until I was like 20 years old. So it took how many years that I lived with it before I even discovered it. And then had a couple of years to understand it and learn how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So I just think having the term to put with it and like being able to look it up and be like, well, this can help me. Or yes, I definitely have those symptoms and other people do too, that we can have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
So, it takes time and like, it's okay that it takes time. I mean, I'm going to have to deal with this for years. And I'm sure as each year goes on, I develop a new coping skill or something like that. So there's always room to learn and grow from it. But just, I think accepting it, or I guess finding it is step number one. And then accepting it is part two of that.
Yeah. And now, is there anything else you've learned about yourself as you've pulled back this layer and discovered this layer? Has it exposed or brought out any other layers?
Yeah, it definitely helped me determine, like, because I have like the seasonal depression and then anxiety and depression, like on top of that. So like this winter season's just rough in general, but it's being able to decipher, this is how it is in the wintertime versus like in the summertime. This is just how it is all the time.
Okay.
So being, able to decipher those two things and deal with them separately.
Sure.
And like, okay, well, I'm anxious about this every day of the year rather than just like, oh, just the winter months. That's something I can deal with when it comes versus something I have to deal with all the time. Well, that's where I can seek help with, get medication, whatever it might be.
Right.
So that definitely like helps the like mental health overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably in just understanding what you need to adjust in your self-care routine throughout. Okay, I need this 12 months out of the year for these things, but this one, not so much, in this season, but here. Yeah. I mean, so I think that also gives language and parameters to that as well, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely.
In living out F.E.E.L, finding empowerment, embracing layers. Talk to me about how doing that with this knowledge has affected you as well as your relationships.
Well, bringing up communication again.
Yeah.
I think for me, that's like number one. That's number one about feel and developing relationships, keeping boundaries, like pursuing relationships, anything it might be, is just staying open and vulnerable with people. And, you can keep some things to yourself. You don't have to share everything with everyone you meet. But I think the people you're closest with and sharing those layers of yourself and sharing who you are and being vulnerable with them, I think is so important. And it's been hard, like, especially over the years, like still finding myself and finding who I am and how I cope and things like that. But just being able to say, we need to talk, and like, nothing's wrong, but I just want to share that this is how I'm feeling, or this is what I need from you. Yeah. So like doing that definitely like is number one.
Yeah. And I would guess, and you can confirm this or deny it, but getting that diagnosis and language probably added to your empowerment within it.
Yeah, for sure. And then it's like, and accepting like that is okay, Yeah. Because you're like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? But like, that's okay, because lots of people have it and lots of people deal with it. So it's not like I'm some science experiment. Like this is like ask anyone on the street, and I'm sure that they've dealt with it too. So
yeah, for sure. And I think knowledge and communication and vulnerability and authenticity leads to empowerment too. Mm-hmm. And then you can collectively, as you're sharing your stories, embrace those layers within yourself and within each other. So I think it's for sure the work starts with you, and then you're able to give that out to other people. We are down to the rapid fire. Within this realm of dealing with this, what are 5 activities during this time that really nourish you?
Reading is number one. I love to read, but especially in the winter when maybe you can't go outside, it's something to stimulate your brain and keep your brain active. So reading is number one for me. Going out, spending time with friends and family is another one. Just keep staying social, I guess.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Writing. I love to write. So that just,
she's our writer.
Yeah, I'm the writer. So definitely. I love that any time of the year, but that's another thing with reading.
Sure.
Is, keeps me active in the brain. Even like staying in on those nights and watching a comfort movie, TV show, Christmas movie, or Thanksgiving episodes of like shows that I love. So that makes me happy, like brings my spirits up for sure. And same thing with like listening to music would be my other one, like upbeat kind of pop or rock, whatever, but something just to keep my mood up. Definitely helps this time of year.
Okay. I'm going to adjust this last one. I normally say 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months. I'm going to say 5 words on how you want to feel the next 3 months, because this is dropping on December 20th and we were walking into it. We are. So talk to me about that.
Definitely want to feel happy and inspired. I want to feel fulfilled in my life and my work and everything, and want to feel successful. And I want to feel loved by friends, family, everybody.
Okay. All right. Jessica, thank you so much again for your just courage in coming forward this and sharing this and being willing to talk about this and being the one on our staff that said, this is a conversation. This fits into our realm of conversations of things that aren't talked about enough. And this is something that women especially struggle with. And so thank you again for your willingness to share and your experience, write about your experience. Audience, there's so many great resources from today's episode. Don't worry, you don't have to take mad notes. They're going to all be listed on our sources doc, which is going to be available on our website the week that the episode drops. You can go to our website, embracinglayers.com, go to sources, click down to this episode, and you're going to find all these sources that Marissa has offered, that Jess has offered. We're going to drop the blog she wrote last spring the week prior to this episode dropping. There's sources in there that you can use as well. You will find us promoted on all of our socials, Instagram, our LinkedIn, our Facebook, our TikTok, our Twitter for now. And Twitter's a moving target right now.
Yeah,
We'll see. Yeah. YouTube, all those things. The episodes will be available with links on all those places, as well as every place you listen to your podcasts, those platforms, Spotify, Google, Apple, all those spots. And we want to hear from you about your experience. Did this help you? Was this an awakening for you? Do you have practices that you use that are helpful? DM us at Embracing Layers on Instagram, or shoot us an email, embracinglayers@gmail.com. Drop us, go ahead and rate our episode wherever you listen to it. We'd love to hear back from you there as well. But thank you again to Jessica and Marissa for having this conversation with us. This is our final episode of season 3. So we're going to be taking a little time off for us to get cozy and warm and do some things to take care of ourselves around the holidays and into the new year. But we'll be back in February. But you can listen to all of our episodes on our website. But we hope you find this helpful and encouraging. And we hope this encourages you to feel safe having these conversations with other people as well. We just want this to be a great resource for you. But we thank you so much for being with us. We wish you the best holidays and New Year, and we will see you in February of 2023. Thanks so much and have a great week.